Alright guys, it's Wednesday and back on the car. I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but the previous owner of this frame who modified the frame was a little overzealous with his strengthening of the area up here in the front, and I have no clearance for the bolt to go through to the lower control arms. So we are going to have to make some clearance by cutting out this little notch here so I can get my through bolt in. So we got the little Dremel out. We're going to cut along the outside lines here, and the hole, you can see the dot in the middle, that's the center of the bolt. So we'll clearance it enough to get enough clearance to get the bolt through there with a nut on it, with a nylock on it, and we'll have to do the same on the other side. Anyway, nothing that a little cutting tool can't correct. Alright guys, so we've managed to clearance this area just enough to get the bolt through, and we're going to put a lick of paint on there just to keep that from rusting. I've just assembled the inner lower control arms. They're not bolted at the rear of the frame, but I have the bolts in the directions that they're supposed to go, and that's all lubed up and ready to go. So these will just slide back in here, and then we'll have to get the trunnion to set up in here. So before we tighten these up to the frame, we're going to get the trunnion situated. We need to sort of separate these a little bit to be able to get the trunnion in, so I don't tighten them up until the very end. Just a quick note on the Magic Kit, guys. Don't always assume that they've given you exactly what you need. For example, I know it may seem trivial, but I'm actually missing 2 washers, and I've just taken a look at the parts diagram, because I know from experience that there's a washer required behind the bracket on the frame. So 65 and 66, if I look here for reference, is calling for a nylock nut, which I have here, and a plain washer. So they did not include 2 of the plain washers in this kit. So again, always kind of reference your parts manual or what you took off the car in order to be able to determine what goes back on the car. Alright guys, I've just hung the vertical link loosely on the bottom of the ball joint, and I've got the new trunnion screwed in there. I'm obviously going to have to unscrew it, add the seal, and actually fill this with gear oil before we do the final installation. But we're just doing a dry fit up for the moment. We're putting our bushings in. There's the little nylon bushings with the steel sleeves. So there they are there. So we're just putting our nylon bushings in with the steel sleeves on the fronts of the lower control arms. So we're just going to do the front side of that, and then we'll bring you back. So now I'm getting upset. So these steel bushings are going through here at the lower control arms. See one just going into the nylon bush here. Well, the problem is the through pin for the trunnion does not go through these steel bushings. Not a hope in hell. So I guess that means I need to ream these steel sleeves out to fit over this bolt. That's ridiculous. I'm going to check it out, do some research before I go ahead and do that. But it looks like I need to ream these guys out in order for them to fit over this slide bolt. Ridiculous. Alright guys, now we got those bushings reamed out a little bit. I can get that bolt through the bushings. So we've started to assemble the lower trunnion. And so it's got these little thrust washers, or little washers, and then it's got this sealing ring and a little grease seal. Now on the TR3 these are wide and they go over the top. It looks like these might be slightly different, and it'll actually just go over the top sort of seal of the nylon bushing here, just like that. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's just on the inside of the nylon bushing. Then this cap goes over top like so to cover that. Then the thrust washer goes on, and then your castle nut and cotter pin. So basically that's the way it goes. I don't know if you can see that or not. So thrust washer, a little grease seal, and then the rubber inside of that, and then like that, and like that, and like that. So kind of reverse sequence to fit against the lower control arms, if you can see that. So that is now assembled. So one quick note, I got away from the other silicone grease and we're going to the synthetic grease. The silicone grease seemed like it was actually quite liquidy after it warmed up a little bit, and it was actually sort of leaching off of where I put it. So I've gone to the synthetic grease, which is a lot more like the Sil Glide that I used to do. Here's an example of the synthetic grease sort of pooling out of where I put it. So that's just been sitting there overnight and it sort of pools out. So I don't think I want that. I want something a little more tacky and sticky. It's going to stay where I put it. So we'll go with the change up on the synthetic grease. All right, we'll keep moving on. All right, guys, we've got our GL4 gear oil standing by, and we're just about to fill the trunnion with gear oil. We've got our seal here on top ready to go, which is supposed to keep the gear oil in once the vertical link is screwed down into it. So we are going to do that. We're going to screw the vertical link down as far as we go, then we're going to turn it back and ensure that we have a full travel of our steering at the same time. So that's what we're going to do now, and then we'll attach the top of the vertical link to our ball joint. Alright guys, that's looking good so far, and we're just going to check for free movement of the suspension up and down, and that's moving nice and easily. So we can move on to the next step, which is probably going to put the caliper backing plate on first with the lock washers, and then we're going to worry about putting the bottom spring pan on with the coil spring. Alright guys, just working on the caliper mounting bolts, and in this case I don't have new ones, so I've just cleaned up the old ones on a wire brush, and we're going to go ahead and utilize those. I've just got my catalog out here to tell me, basically, there's the hardware here that I'm looking for, so I can reference the actual length. If I just look at the part number and type it into the Roadster Factory, for example, it'll give me the length of the bolt and the size of the head. Alright guys, now we've got the steering arm hooked up. We can now look at putting the spring in. So I've gone inside and grabbed our springs. So these are Good Parts lowered springs. They're lowered by 1 inch. They're competition springs. So we've got those. We've got the packings for them here. And we've got the hardware for the spring pans there. So I think we're pretty much ready to go. We'll grab the internal spring compressor and we'll put the spring in. Alright guys, we have our spring in and we've got the internal spring compressor in. We've got our poly packing on top and on the bottom, and we're just starting to tension up the spring and making sure that it seats properly on the top here and on the bottom of the spring plate. We're also going to align these two studs at the rear. As this bottom pan pulls up, they need to sit on those studs, so we'll keep an eye out for those, and then we've got our bolt standing by for the rest of the locations. Alright guys, welcome back to the restoration. It's now Friday, July the 31st, 2020. Unbelievably, July is now gone. Anyway, picking back up on the project where we left off, and I'm not exactly sure where I stopped filming. It wasn't an overly great day in the garage the other day when I was working on this car. Just things, you know, you have those days where things are not coming to hand, you're losing parts, or parts are not fitting properly, etc. So it was a little bit of a frustrating day for me the last day working on this car. So we basically didn't do anything last night except to come out and clean up and organize the garage a little bit. Just got our tools picked up and our parts laid out, ready to go on the passenger side of the car. The driver's side is pretty much done. Obviously I need the brake hub and rotor on, so that's still got to be done. The brake back plate is just kind of sitting on there, or the dust shield, whatever you want to call it, is just sitting there. So that side is almost complete. I'm missing my steering stop on this side. I'm not sure where that is, so we'll have to find that. Of course, nothing is torqued down yet on this at all, so we'll come back to that at a later date, and we will mark which fasteners we've torqued with a little bit of paint, just so we can recognize that they have been torqued and we don't need to do them. So we're just going to continue on the passenger side. I started working on assembling the lower control arm, and you can see it sort of just sitting there with the trunnion and the seal in place. Top is done already, so anyway, we'll continue on and we'll keep adding parts to this passenger side, and I'll take you along a little bit along the way. I think there are some things that I missed out when I was doing the putting together the driver's side, because as I mentioned, I was getting a little frustrated, and filming is not one of the things you want to do when you're overly frustrated working on the car. So anyway, we'll pick it up. Hopefully we'll have a better day out here today. We were a little bit more organized. We've got some fasteners already cleaned up, so pretty much ready to go. Not too hot out here. It's about 80 degrees in the garage right now, so a little more comfortable than previous days working out here. Alright guys, we'll be back. Okay guys, we're just working on fitting the trunnion now. So we have our trunnion seal ready to go. You can see that there. So we've got our gear oil here, and we're just going to place a little bit of gear oil in the trunnion. A lot of this is going to squeeze out as you thread down the vertical link into it. We'll put a paper towel underneath of it. Okay. This vertical link actually has a, I don't know if you can see that. It's actually just got a regular nut on the back. I'm going to replace that with an eye lock, so we'll come back after I do that. Okay guys, hopefully you're recording. So new grease zerk, new, you can see that, our new oil zerk and new nylock nut. So what we're going to do now is we're going to thread the trunnion down as far as it'll go. Try to keep it as vertical as possible so you don't lose all of your gear oil. Oh, don't forget your seal, like I just did. At least I was only a couple threads in before I figured out I forgot my seal. Sure if you're in frame or not. It's really hard to see because of the sun, guys, so sorry. Just see the gear oil starting to squeeze out the excess. So I've got the towel down below. So you want to turn this till it bottoms out completely. Okay, that's completely bottomed out. Now we're going to turn it back till we get to this point, and you're all set to go on your lower trunnion. We'll attach the vertical link to the upper ball joint. Slide it in there, put our nut temporarily. I don't put any anti-seize on the taper up in the ball joint, but I do put a little bit of anti-seize on the threads. There you go. Vertical link installed, lower trunnion installed, lower control arms installed. Alright, just check for free play, looking good. Okay, on to the next step. Okay guys, now that we've got the steering control arm on with the spacers, and we've got the locking plates ready to be locked but haven't locked them yet, We're going to attach the bottom spring pan and the coil spring. So we've got the spring pan here, and the coil spring is over there. So we'll fit the poly packings, top and bottom, on the spring, put them in the pan, put the spring compressor through, and then just wind that up till it's tight. And we'll secure the bottom of the spring pan to the lower control arms with the bolts and nylock nuts. Alright guys, so we have the spring installed, still with the compressor in place, but that's looking good. We're just about to put our bolts in and put our nuts on our two rear studs. I was just looking at the assembly manual, and the assembly manual says to install the bolts this way with the nuts on top, but I actually like to have them this way. So I'm going to go opposite to what the assembly manual calls for. I've never actually seen one with the nuts on top. So we're going to put nuts on the bottom with washers, nylocks with washers on the bottom, and we're going to live with it. Just thought I'd point that out. Alright guys, we're just about to put our shock in now that we've got the compressor out of the spring. I have set the adjustment on 5 from the very softest setting. I think off the top of my head, I haven't read this handbook. I think it goes up to 30 something settings on these SPAC shocks. So anyway, we're going to go at setting number 5 on the from the lowest setting, and got new attachment points for the bottom, our new through bolt, and then we've got new nuts and lock nuts for the very bottom to lock those to the bottom of the spring pan. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that now. Alright guys, we're making pretty good progress today. So the spring and the shock are in on the passenger side, and looking good. So the next step for me will be to get the hubs out, and we'll attach the rotors to the hubs, and then we'll put the rotors on the car, and then we'll officially be at the rolling stage on the front. So I did buy new rotors yesterday. Let me go grab them from the car, and we'll install them to the hubs over on the bench. Alright guys, here's the new rotor, and we're just about to attach the hub to the rotor. So we've got our hardware over here. Incidentally, for anybody who's interested, there is the part number from Moss Motors, made in China. As mentioned, we'll probably end up swapping these out at a later date for some TR250 drilled and slotted rotors, but for right now, we're just going to go with the stock style, and just to get the car rolling. Okay, the first one is on and torqued down. Incidentally, 34 foot-pounds of torque to fasten those rotors to the hubs. So we'll move on to, this is the passenger side, we'll move on to the driver's side. Alright guys, so we're just about ready to fit the rotor and hub assembly. We've got our inner and outer bearings, we've got our oil seal, we've got our D-ring, our castle nut, and our cap ready to go. We also have our grease here so we can repack our bearings. So again, we're just going to put this on temporarily. The idea is it's going to come off. We're going to do the locking plates and torque this. So all of this has got to come off again. This is really just a dry fit up. We are going to grease the bearings anyway with the knowledge that they're going to be coming back off. So just keep that in mind. Alright guys, we're going to have a little discussion regarding the front seals for the wheel bearings. And I've got a brand new one here. There's the part number if you're interested. And the old one. And I'm going to use the old one because the old one's actually in quite good shape. There are some issues with the new ones. In some cases they might be too thick, which prevents you from setting the bearings properly. And in some cases it's best practice to oil these or soak them in oil first. You may need to trim them a little bit if you think they're too thick. Anyway, I prefer to go with, if they're in good shape, I'll keep the existing one. We'll keep these as a backup if need be when next time I check my wheel bearings. So we're going to use this seal. Now the other topic of discussion is how does this seal actually install? In one of my previous videos, and this was actually how the car came to me on my TR6, the bearing or the seal was actually installed towards the bearing, but in actuality it is installed out. So this is the correct orientation of that seal. It is installed outwards, so that seal actually faces the inside here on the stub axle, like so, when it's fitted. Alright, so hopefully that's the end of the discussion. Anyway, that's the correct way to do it, so I'm told. And just so you're aware, the actual metal part gets tapped into the location. Once you put your bearing in, it actually gets tapped into the back side of the hub to seal the bearing in. Alright, first rotor is installed. Again, no split pin or cotter pin. We've just tightened the bearing up just to get the wheel on here. We've just cleaned up the rotor with some brake clean to get off any residue off there. And that's looking good so far. So onto the caliper and the brake backing plate, or the dust shield, whatever you want to call it. So we'll crack the new calipers out and we'll see how they fit.